Hello, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing my 15.4 support tier list of draw content. Subscribe and let's get into it. There weren't a huge amount of changes towards support this patch. We saw a nerf towards Lulu, an adjustment towards Elise, and then some nerfs towards some other off-meta kind of support options. There were also buffs towards Nautilus, he was underperforming in average play, and then some other change arounds. So let's get into it. The D tier is going to consist of relatively similar champions, +2 though. We have Ashe, Veigar, and Malphite as our D tier options. The case of Veigar and Malphite, they are relatively gimmicky picks. You don't really see them outside of specific combos, being Veigar Ziggs, Malphite Yasuo. They have strengths within their kit which allow them to be feasible options here and can win games. The strength of Veigar is his cage, and the strength of Malphite is his ultimate. Plus he has okay lane harass, like Q poke can be something meaningful. In the case of Ashe, she got directly buffed this patch. She received an adjustment towards her ultimate, which now means the AoE damage is 100% plus a 50 damage amp on the spell in total. Has meant something, like support Ashe is definitely performing a bit better. The other two changes weren't so impactful for it, but overall performing better than the other two options within the D tier here. I think Ashe could be bumped up to the C tier, especially if you're very comfortable playing it. Like Ashe support for very experienced players is definitely a higher up option. Like if you go into Elite, Ashe probably sits more like a C, close to B tier option, but for average play, which is mostly focusing towards, Ashe does underperform. She is a very hard to play support option, very much relying on being early aggro, like early aggression, relying on early aggression to forge leads and then being able to use that combined, like to have an advantage in the mid to late game, combined with like landing ultimates. It's a pick which, yeah, requires a decent amount of skill to pilot, and yeah, it's going to stay in the D tier for the moment for that reason. The other champion dropping down is Mel. She is performing a lot worse across all three roles at the moment. She still sees play in support, like a decent amount of play in support actually, but the hits this patch were just too much. Like she will probably get buffed back up in 15.6, as we already know she isn't being buffed in 15.5, but I imagine that's over concerns of the first stand tournament, where she might end up being overpowered if they were to like instantly go and buff her back up. And yeah, in the case of Mel support though, she is definitely underperforming at the moment. Sits as quite clearly probably the lowest of the D tier options. Moving on to the C tier then, we lead off with Hui, who got directly nerfed this patch. Support Hui was always his weakest of his three roles, but with the nerfs losing decent chip damage, it's even more noticeable. The pick definitely sits towards the lower end of the C tier at the moment. Lost a decent amount of power with the nerfs he received this patch. The other picks here are the likes of Amumu, Blitzcrank, Renata. In Amumu's case, his itemization is just his biggest weak point at the moment. Like not having great itemization in the support role really hurts him. He's easy to play though. That is the main factor of picking Amumu. Like his easy lockdown AoE CC can give a lot of value to like players alongside the like sort of MF, for example, who is a relatively prevalent ADC at the moment. So I don't think this champion's unplayable, and I think if you pair it with the right things, it can be quite nice, but definitely not as performant as like he has been in the past, and is kind of prohibited by the fact that his itemization isn't that good. In Silas's case, he's a very volatile support option. If you're very comfortable playing Sylas and you like it into things like the Leo and Navaris pairing, stuff like that, where you can get two really good ults, or enemy team has a Malphite maybe and you're willing to flex or just have the Sylas in the support role, he can be a decent option in those kind of examples. Outside of that, he's not great. Like he's a pretty conditional option here, which requires a decent amount of mastery to pilot the champion. Otherwise you'll find yourself just feeding in a lot of games, and that will feel quite bad and not be a great and consistent way to climb. So yeah, definitely sits towards the middle and the low end of the C tier. The other two options here are Renata and Blitzcrank. In Renata's case, she's just been underperforming for average play for a while. Like Renata hasn't performed well for the majority ever since like almost a release. Like this pick's definitely been struggling. Like I think Radiant Virtue was the last time she was like actually performant as a support. The itemization generally just got weaker for her, but her competitive presence combined with some of her more elite pairings for likes of Kalista, Renata have definitely prohibited her from being buffed. I don't think she's unplayable. In fact, I think she can be really good in specific situations, but relies more on the ADC exploiting the full value of your kit to really get value. Outside of elite, it's just not going to be as worth playing compared to some of the other options. In Blitzcrank's case, he's held here mostly on a frustration basis. Most people don't like Blitzcrank. I mean, it makes sense. The champion has a very obnoxious hook, which can sometimes feel very lacking in counterplay. Obviously, the higher up you go, this champion becomes a lot easier to play against. Like, people will actively utilize the minions and certain picks to really nullify the effectiveness of his champion. But I think generally he can be a fine pick. I don't think he's as strong as he has been in the past. Like, previous iterations of Blitzcrank did more damage and were more durable. This iteration, it's not quite as much in either of those circumstances, but still holds the core fundamental of the champion, where you're playing around his hook value to play the champion. The other picks, actually moving on to the B tier then, are the likes of Teemo. So Teemo, pretty gimmicky, low elo, skewed support option. He sits as a B tier pick because he's not bad. Like, Teemo support can be a fine pick. He gets quite heavily outvalued the higher up you go into elite play. The pick's basically non-viable, like Master Plus, but Diamond below, you can definitely get wins on this champion. And in fact, the lower down you go, the more beneficial it is to have a Teemo on your team. He is an incredibly low elo skewed pick. He scales very nicely. The shrooms obviously give him a lot of value in those situations. And into lanes where blind has a lot of value, he's a pretty effective pick, and I would definitely value him as a B-tier option at the moment. Someone who's really struggling is Shen. The nerfs towards Heartsteel this patch, which was his core first item in support, hurt him, and he's definitely not performing as well at the moment. Obviously, Shen support tends to come out as a counterpick to the likes of Leona and champions which are nullified by his W. That is where the real value of this champion comes in a lot of situations. But his overall damage, his durability, his powerful ultimate can give him some level of value. I don't think he's unplayable by any means as a support, and I think he can be really good in the right spots, but just not performing as well with some of the direct itemization nerfs towards him. Zac sits as a B tier option. He's doing fine. Like a lot of the other lower supports here, they have itemization issues which really prohibits them from being higher. Zac, once again, is another one. He really does want things like Even Shroud and Radiant to be valuable, and those items aren't in the game at the moment, so he suffers. The overall lockets tend to be more valuable for certain supports which can sit more with their team and get value out of it than champions which just want to dive in and are not going to traditionally get as much value from the shield. Zac obviously is another champion which just suffers from that, so he does sit towards the lower end of the B tier. Galio, another example. Galio support is decent though. He's a good flex option. I think some of these options are really good flex picks which can give them value and support, and Galio is a great anti-dive option, but in certain lanes he will just not be that impactful and can be spaced, and then you're sat with a champion which is basically just a health pool, and that can feel quite bad in certain circumstances. Pyke is an incredibly elite skewed support. He isn't like the other four options here, and in fact he isn't like most of the options on this list. He is a very, very powerful carry option in the support role. He does a huge amount of damage, and if you can abuse the early game strengths of this champion and close out games within 20-25 minutes, he can be a really valuable pick. If you can't, he loses a lot of his potential, and if you're playing him relatively passive, almost every other pick in the support role is just going to outvalue him. You need to be in the face of the enemy. You need to be getting early kills, otherwise you will just fall off compared to some of the other options on this list. The prohibiting factor on why he's in the beta is the elite skew. If you are very comfortable playing Pyke, he can comfortably go up to the A, S tier and compete with some of those options. Alistar is a great counterpick to Rel. He's not performing as well for the average player at the moment, and that has been a very similar issue for the likes of Nautilus. They traditionally come out as we need an engage support option or a hook support option. Let's pick Alistar, let's pick Nautilus. They aren't so much utilized as counterpicks. Obviously, Alistar is utilized more as a counterpick because he has some pretty polarizing matchups, but Nautilus is just the I need an engage option, let's pick Nautilus. He got buffed this patch though, and he definitely sits as more like a high beta option now, but still not quite as performant. Rakan, Leona, other champions which have been either nerfed or just fallen out of the meta over time. In fact, in Rakan's case, he's been buffed as a more recent, which helped him more in elite than average play, which is where he is struggling more as a champion. Average Rakan is just not that great. He just underperforms at the moment. The value which you can get out of some of the enchanters and some of the other picks which have more agency just outvalues him as a champion. In Leona's case, she's been directly nerfed a couple of times. She was obviously, I believe at some point last year was becoming really, really popular. Whether that, I think that was through the likes of Bloodsong last year, and then people realized, they hopped onto the Leona train. She'd basically not seen competitive play for like 2 years, and now Leona, yeah, back to being like an okay option. Like, if you are looking for someone with a good ultimate, with relatively decent durability and a large pool of CC, then she is still a decent option. She's just not as performant with direct nerfs. Yumi is doing better at the moment. She's towards the high end of the B tier. This is one of the best spots Yumi has been in post update, when they did the adjustments to push her away from being like good on like junglers, and like gave her the best friend bonus. This is, yeah, definitely one of the better spots she's been in. Obviously, she has specific pairings which she wants to be part of. The champions which can benefit from on-hit damage, and the scaling aspect of the champion can really benefit from a Yumi. Some of her lanes seem a bit unconventional though, like the Lucian and the Tristana actually perform really well with Yumi. These champions can either shove or have relatively good safety nets to kind of exploit the values of Yumi, and yeah, that can be a way of playing her. So Yumi sits towards the high end of the beta at the moment. If you enjoy Yumi, I'd recommend playing her in her current state. Seraphine, definitely on the underperforming side of things. They are buffing her in 15.5. In fact, I'll probably end up shifting over to the new patch notes system, which will be the 25.05 thing. I'll probably just skip out the 0 and just go 25.5. I don't know why Riot felt the need to adjust them, but that's what they did, so we'll have to run with it. But yeah, Seraphine getting buffed next patch should help her damage. Her current state, she is a jack of all trades champion. She doesn't really excel in any aspect, but has a lot of tools which she can use in different circumstances. The CC, the heal, the shields, the damage are all there, but she's underperforming at the moment. Sits as more like a mid to low end B tier option. LeBlanc and Zoe, and actually, I have like a lot of the AP damage options here. So like the Zoes, the LeBlancs are your mid lane to support options. They do have decent value here and can be actually even more valuable than their mid lane counterparts, purely on a basis of being easier to play. Like, you don't have to focus on CSing, which these two champions can struggle at. These two picks obviously want to use their spells to push the wave, and then either going or just just not using your spells correctly can definitely be punishing. Obviously, if you play these champions well in mid lane, they can be really powerful options, but in the support role, you can put less games into them and still get good amounts of value. They do need gold though. That is usually the main factor for playing these champions. They're not as dependent on level scaling, but need a lot of gold to be valuable. In Swain's case, he's doing a bit better at the moment. The direct buffs he received helped his durability. The nerfs towards Fimbulwinter did hit him this patch if you are opting into the Rhyhorn Fimbulwinter build. I still don't like support Swain. I think it is the weakest of his 4 roles. But if you enjoy playing him here, he's fine. Like, you can opt into him, and he is not a terrible option. I just think he's not going to get the same level of gold, which can hurt his durability and then hurt his value from like his ultimate, for example, where you want to get multiple recasts and just have the durability to main uptime within it. Morgana and Brand are your stereotypical low elo options. In Morgana's case, she is bad for the most part, but the value which you can get out of her in low elo from people not dodging your Q, and just your pool when you get access to some damage options and people standing in it for too long, just ends up giving her some relevance. I don't think the pick's in a particularly good spot at the moment. I think the kit is a bit of a mess. Sometimes, in some situations, the kit doesn't have almost any value outside of the Q, for example. In other situations, you can get a lot of value out of Black Shield. The W, for the most part, isn't going to be a particularly impactful spell in support, but jungle Morgana is reliant on it, for example, and so is mid lane. Her ultimate, though, also is another piece of her kit, which ends up you want to be close to the enemy, but then you want to be casting Qs and Ws from far back, and it just ends up with this misaligned kind of goal. So Morgana isn't a pick I'd really recommend learning, but there are spots where she can be valuable if you can get good value out of Spell Shield for the most part. In Brand's case, he's been overnerfed because of jungle. I think Brand support, Brand mid have really suffered from the sins of that. He should probably be buffed directly for his solo lane, or just laning in general to help out support as well. But then there's always the concern that bot brand becomes OP. Right now, though, I think the champion's in a bit of a weaker spot. He still performs decently well in low and mid MMR, but high elo, he's basically back to being non-viable, which is kind of unfortunate for the champion. Tahm Kench lost more power this patch. The nerf towards Heartsteel once again hit this champion. I think Tahm Kench has really suffered from, well, I mean, being Riot special more than anything. They directly nerfed him like 3 times in a row, and then nerfed his itemization, and the champion's in a pretty rough spot at the moment. I wouldn't really recommend picking Tahm Kench as a support option. However, he can still perform relatively well in low MMR, where you can consistently get more Heartsteel stacks, than higher up, where it's just not going to perform as well at the moment. Other picks, which are actually moving on to the A tier then. So the A tier is going to lead off with Pantheon. Pantheon support is doing decently at the moment. The champion obviously is a 4-way flex pick, being able to be played in the jungle, mid lane, top lane, and support. I would say he's actually decent in all 4 roles. I'd say, if anything, top lane's probably the weakest of his roles. The main kind of factor with this champion is you need to be advantageous early on into the game. If you play this champion passive, you will be outvalued by other options. But if you can snowball an advantage, he has levels of durability with his E. He does a large amount of damage. His ultimate is obviously non-combat, which does mean he isn't going to usually be as effective as like certain champions at level 6. But if you can get these roams down, you can get the isolated picks, he can be a really valuable option. So definitely sits more like an A tier AD pick at the moment. Probably the most valuable of the AD picks if you don't play Pyke. But if you play Pyke, then Pyke can be another really competitive option with him. Bard is decent. Like, Bard has definitely benefited from other things moving around him. He likes the durability, like the tankier build at the moment. I believe that is the Deadman's variant of Bard, but we have seen like loads of different variants. Like, we've seen Static Shiv variants, for example, and like you can pick between Bloodsong and Souls to Slay. There's different ways of playing Bard, and Electrocute being buffed also helps him if you do opt into it. He's a champion with a large amount of variety, but you do want to put a lot of games into him. If you first time Bard, you will probably grief your team. That is most likely what will happen. So put a lot of games into him, and you will definitely get value out of the champion. Neeko sits as an A tier option. She has found her place in the support role. The pick's decent here. Good early game harass, oftentimes being able to automatically shove lane with the power of her Q, and like E being able to AoE tag all minions. Her snare is a very valuable part of her kit, and with certain ADC pairings, she can definitely find a really good spot within the support role. I'd say she's a very deserving A tier option. Some of your more gimmicky picks are like your Shakos and your Fiddlesticks, where they can, in certain team comps, solo win the game. Fiddlesticks is an incredibly powerful ultimate, and is a relatively decent support option at the moment. In Shaco's case, into compositions which have a really hard time dealing with traps, he can be a really powerful pick. There are certain champions which just can't deal with traps without activating them, and you are almost going to be guaranteed damage no matter what. The more melees you play into, the more value the traps will traditionally have, as ranged champions can obviously break them from further away using Sweeper. So keep that in mind. But yeah, Shaco support, definitely a really solid option if you are very comfortable playing it. Zilean, relatively unpopular, kind of similar to Taric in that aspect, but can be a really effective pick. If you can consistently like play around an individual target, speeding them up, allowing them to kind of run into a fight, utilize their combo, or help their combo out, like your Hekarims, your Urgots, your Cho'Gaths, for example, where if you speed these champions up, they can be incredibly powerful, like damage options as well. So keep that in mind. Definitely gives his champion increasing value, but as just an individual support with high base damage and tanky builds or damage builds, he can be a really valuable pick, so definitely deserving of an A tier spot. Maokai is a very easy to play engage option with great like long range tools, point and click CC, good disruption, good vision control. I think he's in a relatively good spot for support at the moment. He's also a 3-way flex pick technically, although top lane Maokai is bad at the moment, and jungle Maokai is just not really played in solo queue, so he will traditionally be played support as his main role at the moment. Senna, decent option, has both the Enchanter and the Utility build. You can opt into your Cleavers, you can opt into your Echoes of Helia, Moonstone, Dawncore variants, and she can be quite valuable in both those aspects. She doesn't have as much individual carry agency as she has done in the past, but if you can get access to some of her item spikes, she can be an incredibly powerful pick, and the value of Cleaver on her is one of the best within the game. She can apply it incredibly quickly onto specific targets, making it really comfortable to kill tanks for certain members of your team. Some of your enchanter options include Soraka and Sona. Not quite S-tier picks, but definitely if you're very comfortable with them, could be really valuable champions. I really like the value Soraka has with her ultimate. It gives her a lot of map control. In Sona's case, if you really spike quite heavily in the mid game, but it's a lot about how you play your early game, where the real difficulty and challenge of this champion comes in. Like, good Sonas will be oppressive in lane in a lot of situations, and if you can consistently rotate like empowered Qs and like good amounts of damage within laning phase, making it easier for your spike to really come through and like your ADC to play the game, she can be a really solid pick. A lot of Sonas don't really exploit this value of her, which can definitely like lead the champion to feeling really useless until like specific points of the game, which is where the negative like kind of like thoughts around Sona come in for a lot of people. So Thresh is in my A tier. I'm mixed on this champion. In a lot of situations, he can just feel kind of useless, but if you get a good Thresh, this champion can feel 1v9 in specific spots. I'd really recommend learning Thresh at some point, and if you pilot him well, he can be really, really powerful. He's definitely in one of the better spots he's been in at the moment. He got buffed recently, and that really helped him. He actually has a lot of base damage, and if you get access to a lot of souls, and you're ahead of the curve, this champion can actually do a meaningful amount of damage. So definitely doing a lot better at the moment. A pick which I'd recommend learning, not just first time. Like, if you first time Thresh, you would definitely struggle compared to some of the other options. The 3 damage options I have here are Xerath, Vel'Koz, and Lux. I think all 3 of these picks, if you give them gold, can be incredibly valuable. In Vel'Koz's case, he has probably the best base damage of all 3 of them. You can just output a huge amount with this pick. The ultimate is also an incredibly powerful tool. Lux needs gold to be valuable. If you fall behind on Lux, she just becomes a snare and slow bot, which will feel really bad. So if you're comfortable playing Lux, play her. If you're not, I wouldn't really recommend playing the pick. Xerath has great artillery, which can be really valuable in a lot of drafts, but would usually be better off if just played in the mid lane. But if you enjoy Xerath support, he's a decent option. Like, the CC combined with the damage output of the champion can be decent. Some of the other picks here are Milio, who's doing decently at the moment. The pick tends to want specific pairings to get the most out of the champion. If you pair Milio with a pick which doesn't benefit from like the W's sustained healing, or the opt into like the Ardent sensor, then yeah, the champion will be less valuable, and you'd rather have engaged supports in certain circumstances. But Milio as an enchanter, still a very decent pick. The other options here are Taric, Braum, and Rel. In Taric and Braum's case, they're great defensive options. Braum is actually doing really well for the average player at the moment. Like, he had been for a long time kind of gated by pro play, but if you pick Braum into some of the engage options, like the blind engage options, like your Nautilus, then he can be an incredibly powerful pick. Taric also tends to be heavily one-tricked by like specific players, but if you can bring out a Taric every so often and get good value out of a champion, he can be an incredibly potent pick. Rel is the more generalistic option of these 3. She does have some hard matchups like your Poppies and your Alistars, but if you can find the angles for Rel where you can get a huge amount of value out of her engage, CC, and like ultimate, then she is a very valuable champion to have in your arsenal, and definitely a pick I'd really recommend playing at the moment. Moving on to the S tier then, we have Poppy, who is a great anti-engage option, has very high base damage to the point where she's being nerfed once again in 15.5. This is the 3rd change targeted towards her to try and nerf her out of being like a really oppressive support option. Do I think this will kill the champion? Probably not. I imagine it will drop her down to the A tier. But in her current state, with the buff towards Halo Blade, she is performing really well at the moment. And I definitely recommend still having the champion within your arsenal, but it won't be as strong going into next patch. Some of the other options here include Elise, who has been bumped up from the A tier to the S tier. Riot did a bit of an oopsie with this one. Tried to change her so she was less powerful as a support, but better within the jungle. And just overall ended up over buffing her. They are nerfing her in 15.5, rightfully so. This champion, if you put the time into her, is probably the strongest support in the game at the moment. Her dives are incredibly powerful, her damage is incredibly high, her scaling is not great, but it's not as bad as it has been in the past, which was one of the prohibiting factors of the champion. But if you are very comfortable playing Elite support, it's definitely a pick I'd really recommend playing, especially if you're looking to have a bit more agency within drafts. Same goes for Zyra. Zyra's a great option. The lower down you go, Elite definitely scales up more into high elo, whereas Zyra definitely performs worse the higher up you go, but better the lower down, where people won't as effectively play around your plants, and you can consistently get multi-man ultimates and just output huge amounts of damage. If you're just looking for a better brand at the moment, Zyra is the pick I'd recommend leaning towards. But she still just isn't going to usually be as effective the higher up you go if you're looking to be more of just a genuine support option, which is where the other 4 champions come in here. I'll have Janna and Karma as slightly lower S tier options. Karma will suffer in 15.5 with the nerf towards Axiom Arcanist, but it's still a very performant option at the moment, especially now that people have definitely started leaning more towards some of the enchanted builds on her. In Janna's case, she is a great anti-engage option. Her E is an incredibly powerful ability if you have someone who truly benefits from AD steroids. She's a bit more situational, but if you can find the right spots for her, she is one of the best supports within the game. And then Nami and Lula are your more traditional enchanters. In Lula's case, she wants to traditionally play with attack speed orientated marksman, and the direct nerfs towards her this patch have definitely hurt her. They've dropped her down from the S plus to the S tier, and in Nami's case, she is probably the premier support of the patch at the moment. She's performing really well. She pairs really nicely with most ADCs within the game, being able to utilize the effectiveness of her E damage and E slow, whilst having decent base damage and a very powerful W ability. Her ultimate gives her some level of range as well, for engages. I think this pick isn't going to be the engage option a lot of people want to play, and can obviously be swapped out if you are looking to play a Rel or a Nautilus or a Braum. But if you are looking for an enchanter, I'd recommend leaning towards Nami this patch. It was Lulu last patch, but yeah, Nami definitely performing really well with Lulu being nerfed. So keep that in mind. The buffs towards Staff of Flowing Water going into next patch, I imagine, will help her as well. So keep in mind that is a change which is going to be happening. Those are my thoughts for the 15.4 support tier list. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.